Hey listeners, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. I get the privilege of working alongside all of the creators at Enrollify, but I wanted to take just a quick moment to tell you about why I love the application, the podcast hosted by Allison Tercio, AVP for Enrollment and Marketing at Siena College. The application is your playbook for the ever-evolving world of higher ed enrollment marketing. This podcast zeroes in on the niche, often unexplored areas of the field, delivering a potent mix of actionable insights, practical strategies, and cutting-edge perspectives. Some of my favorite episodes are on topics like activating your school's student influencers, mastering the student inquiry moment, and even a roadmap to web accessibility. Allison cuts to the chase and keeps you entertained in these short 30-minute episodes that drop every other Tuesday. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the application wherever you get your podcasts.
On episode 17, we spoke to Kin Sejpal about the international employee experience. Let's extend that conversation with someone you might know, Dayana Kibilds. She's the host of the Enrollify podcast, Talking Tactics. We're going to walk a mile in her shoes and learn about how complicated the U.S. immigration system can be. Also, we're going to learn about the personal impact of navigating that system. And finally, Day is going to give her thoughts about how colleges and universities can invest in a better talent experience for international faculty and staff. Now, a little bit about our guest, Dayana Kibilds. She's a strategy director for Ologie, and as I said, she's the host of Talking Tactics. She focuses primarily on enrollment marketing strategy for educational organizations. And in her 12 years in higher education, Day has led enrollment and digital innovation work at Penn State, Cornell, and Western University in Canada. Here's that conversation with Day. And oh, by the way, don't forget to like and follow I Want to Work There. Here's our conversation with Day. Welcome to I Want to Work There, a podcast that helps colleges and universities boost their brands as employers of choice. I'm your host, Eddie Francis, brand strategy consultant for Edify Ventures. Join me every other week for discussions with some of the best minds in talent recruitment and retention, human resources, and marketing and communications inside and outside of higher education. I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals just like you grow, and explore our other shows at enrollify.org, or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Thank you for logging on to I Want to Work There. I'm Eddie Francis, and joining me, it is an Enrollify crossover. Cue the DJ horn. Oh, you did it better than I did. That was perfect. You know what? Okay, Dave.
I think that was my first time.
Oh, you just talked yourself into being my sound effects person. So this is going to be the new wrinkle for I Want to Work There. Hit it again, Dave. Dayana Kibilds, she is the host of Talking Tactics. Also, she's a strategy director for Ologie. Day, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you for making me laugh right off the bat.
Oh, no problem. No problem. And you know what? And so for the audience, I'm going to drop an editorial message in here. And I need you to keep this in the podcast. Do not cut any of what happened in that introduction out. I want the horns in. I want it all in. Okay,
we need
good.
We need the horns. We need
the horns in. And I'm glad we started that way because, you know, I had this great conversation with our good friend Kin Sejpal about the world of the international employee and what it's like working at a college or university or anywhere else in this country for that matter. But it is a bit complicated in higher education for folks who are from outside of the US. And then you contact me and say, oh, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's a little bit more to this story. And so you really wanted to add something to this because as far as I'm concerned, if an institution is going to have a great employer brand, I do think a very important part of that is understanding the kind of talent experience someone from outside of the US is going to have. But there are some issues, and some of those issues are out of the college or university's control because of immigration policies. So let's start, just so that people can understand what the landscape is like. Let's start with a pretty complicated story, and that's your visa story. What happened?
First of all, I think I'm not sure that a lot of people know that I am not American. I think
Mm,
I kind of pass as American in a lot of circles, but I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and I actually moved to the US for the first time when I was almost 10 years old. So in 1995, my dad was chasing the American dream and moved our whole family there. However, during that time, we were not quite legal, is what I like to say. We weren't illegal because we had valid tourist permits to be in the US that got renewed every year, but we weren't residents and we couldn't stay long term. So that was the beginning of my visa story. The first time I left my home country in 1995. So after 6 years of being there in that kind of precarious situation, we left. We went to Mexico, and I lived in Mexico and then Germany, and then went back to Mexico, and then my U.S. visa story began again. So in 2010, I was living with my now husband, and he got accepted to a PhD program in the United States. Wonderful, right? But of course, for me to move with him, we were living together. We had been living together for 2 years. We had to get married because there was no legal way for me to move with him if we weren't legally married.
mm,
So we did that because we were planning to do that anyway. We moved to, I don't know if I want to like throw schools under the bus, but I feel like people know where this was. We moved to that school. We moved to that place.
hmm
And you know, there's an international office who works with the PhD students, and they do a fantastic job with like a typical PhD student case, and they help them. They support the students in getting their visas, right? So they did all the paperwork they would normally do for a PhD student and got him an F1 visa, which is a student visa. The problem is, and what we didn't know, that if you are the spouse of an F1, so if you're an F2, you have no pathway to work legally in the US. You cannot get a work permit. You cannot get anything. You cannot work legally in any way unless you yourself get sponsored under your own visa, or you find another way.
now, is that explained?
That is not explained. And that
Okay.
was, I think, the first kind of horror story,
Hmm.
which if I could go back in time, and in fact, if there's one thing I want anyone listening to this to like remember, is that if you are a professional that helps students do this, ask them, do you have a spouse? Does your spouse want to work? Because there
Hmm.
are options, but the option is not F1, F2.
Mm,
So at that point, even though my husband was just starting his PhD, I had already started my career too. And I had been working in marketing for 3 years, and I had like no plans to stop working, right?
mhm.
That wasn't part of the plan. We were a very young married couple. Like we didn't have like I had nothing else to do, right? So I'm like, okay, very naively, I'm like, I'm going to start applying to a lot of jobs at the university and at local companies. And I would make it to the very final round of these interviews. And then the answer would always be, oh, no, we can't sponsor you. We're not going to sponsor you. A lot of employers actually make you answer like a questionnaire in advance, like when you fill out the application, I guess. And they ask you, do you have the right to work legally in the
Yep.
US? And I would check yes. Even
Hmm.
though I didn't, because I wanted them to meet me and I wanted them to give me a shot, and I wanted to prove that I was the best candidate for the job, regardless of where I was born, right?
Hmm.
So, anywho, that never worked out for us. So, in January 2011, so that's like 4 months later, we realized, somebody told us, I don't know how we realized this, that if my husband's visa had been a J1 instead of an F1, I would be a J2. And a J2 actually can get an independent work permit. Like as a J2, I could apply for a work permit in the US and then be able to work wherever I wanted. And again, if somebody had told us that way at the beginning, it would have saved us a lot of hassle, right?
What's a J1?
I believe it's called an exchange visitor visa.
Okay.
I'm not an immigration expert, so I'm not quite sure who it's open to. But in this case, because my husband is Mexican, it's the type of visa that allows you to be in the United States as a student or in some sort of other position. But then technically you're supposed to go back to your country after whatever that period is. Except if you are a member of like the NAFTA treaty. So Mexico, the US, and Canada, the North America Free Trade Treaty, you don't like that's waived. So we didn't have any plans to go back to Mexico after his PhD. In fact, we wanted to stay in the US. So that when we realized that could be waived for him, that was the best option for us, right? So he needed to switch to J1. I needed to switch to J2, and then I needed to apply for a work permit. At this point, so this is January 2011, we had been in the US for 4 months or so, me completely unemployed. I actually looked in my email today, Eddie, because I was already applying to jobs and like I was in these final rounds, and I found an email in my inbox that I wrote to like the person who interviewed me at a job at the university, explaining this J1 and J2 thing to them. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm like, good morning, Joe and Bob. This is very cute because I was 26 years old and I thought I was so adult. My husband and I spoke to a lawyer at the international office of the university, and he told us about the J1, J2 visa requirements. My husband and I qualify for this type of visa, and it would give me permission to work in the United States. We are planning to travel to Mexico the first 2 weeks of March to apply, and we expect to get it granted without any complications. I was wrong. Reader, I was wrong. After the change goes through, I have to apply for employment authorization, which may take up to 90 days. Reader, I was wrong. So, an estimate, I would be ready to legally work in the US by April at the earliest or by June at the latest.
Oh, man.
I'm so cute, right? And this is January, okay? If you are considering me for the position, I would be willing to start working with volunteer status until the paperwork is ready to formally hire me. I know the situation is a bit uncommon, but as I expressed to you in the interview, I really believe I can contribute something valuable to the team, and I think the job is a very good match for me. I don't mind foregoing a couple of months' salary in exchange for a fulfilling job during the next 5 years. How cute is she?
Yeah, she was very cute.
How
I've seen
cute
those
is she?
emails too. Yeah.
And so I was willing to work without pay just
Yeah.
to work, right? And I remember actually this was a position in the alumni office. And I was, I had been doing marketing for 3 years. I really wanted this job, but it didn't work out. So as I had put in the email in March, we had to go to Mexico for my husband to change his status from F1 to J1. You can't do that from within the US. You have to leave the country and come back. And this is a PhD student. The man has things to do, right?
Right.
So we leave, we come back. His J1 was immediate, no problem. He came back to the US almost right away. My J2 took 3 months. And I had to stay in Mexico while that happened, while my husband came back to the US or went back to the US. And that's not the US's fault, I'll say. That was Mexico's ridiculous immigration system. But again, I feel like I've been a victim of various countries' immigration systems. Anyway, so in May, 3 months after being in Mexico without him, I came back to the US with my J2 and I immediately applied for a work permit, which took about the 90 days that I thought it would. So a summer day in July, I go to the mail, I get this letter, and in it is this card, this silly little card that basically told me, oh, you're allowed to work again, almost a year after I had moved to the US in the first place. I remember looking at it and I just started crying. Like these are community mailboxes, right? Like it's not at my house. And I'm like bawling. Like, oh my gosh, I'm allowed to be productive again. So I, of course, started applying for a ton of jobs again, but it would still take me many, many months to get one.
Yeah.
And I didn't care. Like I I remember at some point, I'm like, I don't care what I'm doing. I need to work. So we got in a car and we went to every restaurant in that town until somebody hired me on the spot. Like, it's like, we're not giving up
Wow.
until I have a job, any job. And I wanted to work in a kitchen. I thought, this might be fun rather than like retail or something like that. And I did that. I did that for a few months before finally in February 2012, a year and a half after I moved there, I finally got my first university job.
Wow. So while all of this is happening, how is this making you feel personally?
It's such a denial of any value that you have to offer as a human being, as a professional, that like you are not even worth being considered. That's the
Hmm.
message. That's the immigration message, right?
Hmm.
It's it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter. Nothing, literally nothing matters
Hmm.
because you happen to be born someplace you also had no control over, by the way. That's not the right place, right?
Hmm.
And my entire life I've dealt with a lot of that because I've lived in many countries that are not the place where I was born. And it's a very similar story,
Hmm.
but I think what changes and what's really particular about employers in the United States is that it there's very little empathy about it. I'll just say it
Hmm.
that way,
Hmm.
right? There's very little empathy about it. And, having gotten that job in 2012 wasn't even the end of it, Eddie. It was I had a work permit, but then we had to deal with a bunch of renewals and even more changes after that made me feel even worse.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
um so that first year with the first couple of years with the work permit was great because they were directly tied to the length of my husband's PhD program. So 5 years or 4 years, I don't know. I don't remember actually.
Hmm.
But nobody finishes a PhD in 4 years.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's kind of a tough
right?
ask. Right.
So he had to extend his PhD and so he had to extend his visa, right? And then that meant my work permit expired and I had to extend it. And then the university would only extend it 1 year at a time. And so
Wow.
and then you need like a 3-month lead in to renew your work permit. So like you have me renewing this thing like every 8 months or so to make sure there's no interruption in like my ability to work. But when shit hit the fan, if I can say that on your podcast, is when he got accepted to his postdoc, which is a great thing for him, right? Like he graduates from his PhD. What an accomplishment. He gets a postdoc at another university. And legally, what happens there is that his sponsorship to be in the US is still with the original university, the PhD
Hmm.
university, not the postdoc university. But because you're no longer a student there, you're like way low on their priority list, right? Like they don't
Yeah.
care anymore. You're no longer
Yeah.
really a student there. You're doing a postdoc somewhere else. And so when we needed his stuff to be extended for me to be able to renew my work permit in advance of when his things were expiring, right? So you can imagine it this way, like if his thing expired in July, like I actually needed it renewed in April so I could submit my paperwork so that I would get it in July, my work
Yep.
permit in July. But with him, they were like, it doesn't matter. We'll just make a quick switch here. It doesn't have to be so far in advance. And we're trying to explain to them, no, this is for my wife. Like my wife needs the lead time to be able to renew
Hmm.
her work permit. And they did not care. Honestly, they did not. And
Hmm.
so what happened, it actually happened while we were at that postdoc school. I was very lucky that I actually got a job there too. But there was a month, like I had been working there for a couple of months, and there was a month I could not work because my work permit expired. And they were very gracious and they put me in a unpaid leave instead of just firing me, to be
Hmm.
honest,
Hmm.
until I got the work permit again. And then I was able to resume my duties again. But yeah, you can imagine like by that point in my career, I had spoken at conferences, I had won awards, I was quite becoming quite successful.
Hmm.
And when you ask me how it makes me feel like none of that is worth anything, right? It's
Right.
what is the point of any of it if when it comes to like the most basic thing, it doesn't help you at all.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Mallory, Chief Strategist of Enrollify. Why travel far when an exceptional higher ed conference experience awaits from the comfort of your campus or home office? I'm thrilled to announce that every single session at the 2024 Engage Summit will be live streamed. And the best part? Registration is free. Many of your favorite Enrollify creators are presenting. Maya Demishkovich and Jenny Lee Fowler will teach you how to craft an AI-powered social media influencer strategy. Jamie Hunt will help you unlock the AI revolution in your team. And Shane Baglini and Allison Tercio are teaming up to boost your productivity with generative AI. Plan out your dream conference by scoping out the agenda and taking note of the sessions you want to tune in for. Visit engage.element451.com and register yourself and your team for free today. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. You're listening to I Want to Work There. I'm Eddie Francis. We're talking to our good friend, host of Talking Tactics, and that's Dayana Kibilds. And she's also the strategy director of Ologie. And as you were talking about how it makes you feel, and at some point you alluded to coming from quote unquote the right country or the right part of the world. And did you notice maybe or had you gotten wind of that there were people from other countries who maybe got a different type of treatment, it seemed, or they had a smoother path, or no?
Honestly, I can't say that I had
Okay. All
noticed.
right.
These are, unless you ask, a lot of people don't volunteer these
Right.
stories.
Right.
And then like a lot of the people that I knew that were immigrants, very few of them were like spouse immigrants like my husband and I were, right?
Hmm.
Usually it's just one person that's the spouse, that's the immigrant, and then married to a US citizen, which completely changes how easy it is for them. Like
Hmm.
that, getting married is one of the paths to citizenship in the US. But we were already both foreigners and both married. So we
Right.
couldn't, right? Obviously, we couldn't do that. So I knew a lot of folks like that. And then the other international students that I knew, their spouses that were foreigners, they didn't really want to work. And so it was a challenge for me because I already had a career too, and I
Hmm.
wanted to work too. And maybe that's greedy, but is it greedy if you have a young couple who both want to contribute in some way? I
Right.
don't know.
Right. I mean, listen, you're being educated in the country, and
Hmm.
so you are contributing intellectual capital to the society, and so it also makes me wonder, though. You mentioned being students, but then when you think about traditional students who may be from the U.S. or who may have been born in the U.S. To parents who are not from the U.S., but would you say that there's some sort of impact on them when it comes to
Hmm.
this? Because my thought, and the reason I even do this podcast in the first place, is that if you really want to have great student
Hmm.
satisfaction, that you need the people to deliver that satisfaction, which
Hmm.
means you need great employee satisfaction too. And so,
Hmm.
can you say that you have noticed or heard any stories of how this sort of thing impacts students?
I mean, I think now that I've been in higher ed for so long, I see a lot of schools put in their strategic plans that they want to become more international, right? Like they want to
Hmm.
internationalize their
Yeah.
whatever, their students, their strategic priorities, talk about international research and recognition and so on, right? Um, so if I agree with you, like if a school wants that, like if you want a great international student experience, then you also need to have the international staff that can share some of those lived experiences with them, right?
Right. Right.
Um, I think about international employees and the role and the function they can play as mentors and guides, and just somebody with a cultural understanding of some of the
Hmm.
students that come from abroad, because those students are leaving everything that they knew, right? And so it's it could be an easy way to create belonging on campus, to have not just to say that your faculty is international, but that your academic advisors are,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
your admission counselor is, or these there's there's that level, like the same thing that we might think about other underrepresented groups, right? That how you might form that kinship with someone who has shared your lived experience and has gone through this immigration and visa struggle like you. Because I think if you haven't ever gone through this yourself, you just do not understand how inferior it makes you feel, and how
Hmm.
what a hurdle it is, and how challenging and complicated and expensive it is. And like, I think it would help there. The other one is, my husband himself, right? Like, he was a student at the university.
Right.
And when you think about wanting to attract this talent, especially research talent, right, to increase your own research prowess out there in the world, the school that they do their PhD really matters, right? So when you're bringing a student from abroad who is already married, and this is particularly, grad programs and PhDs, why not think about their family, right? Why
Hmm.
not think about what the family wants to do and how the family wants to continue? And I think about his experience of this. Like, mine was shitty, but his was shitty too, because
Hmm.
he's trying to do a PhD, but then there's his wife depressed because she can't work and she feels inferior because nobody wants her, right? Nobody wants to sponsor her. And he's trying to navigate his new PhD and his, like, obviously that's a lot of work, and then his home life and trying to
Hmm.
support me and having to leave the country to change his visa and having to help me with my paperwork. And like, that's terrible for him too, right? I do think, there's no easy solution, but I think it does affect students indirectly and directly if we don't even just try to talk about what that international employee experience might be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because part of the magic of being on a college campus, I mean, listen, I'm from New Orleans and I got my undergrad degree in my home city. But when I was on my campus at Loyola, I felt like I was in another world because I got to meet Spanish speaking students. I got to meet Asian students. I got to meet, I had this Korean professor and I had this
Hmm.
Indian professor. And it was just it was wonderful to me to meet all of these different people from all these different parts of the world and to hear them speak all these languages. I mean,
Hmm.
it was music to my ears to hear all of these different languages and everything. And so to me, that's part of the magic of even being on a college campus in the first place,
Yeah.
especially for students who never thought that they would get out of their neighborhoods, or they are really, hungry to meet different types of people. They're hungry for the national diversity, the ethnic diversity, and all of these different things. So to me, I'm with you. I mean, what do we do to make this a path so
Hmm.
that we can make this the wonderful melting pot that it is? And oh, by the way, we do need our US students to be able to do business all over the world.
Right.
And so
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, and so making that pathway only makes sense, which
Hmm.
brings me to that other question of, is there something about higher education in particular that makes it a bit more complicated, or does it not
Yeah.
matter?
I think there is something that makes it a little bit more complicated. And you mentioned this at the beginning, like, some things employers can't control, any type of employer, right? So the way
Hmm.
immigration works in the US is there's an allotment. There's a number of green cards or residents that can be given out any given year. There's a number of H-1B visas, which is like right to work, right to live,
Hmm.
that can be given out at every given year. And I think there's counts for all the types of visas like that. So what happens with universities and some of like the big tech companies, right, is that they get a bigger allotment of visas they can sponsor because they depend on international talent. So you can
They do,
imagine,
yes, a
right?
lot.
Imagine this with Google, imagine this with
Right.
Microsoft, imagine, right? So they get this bigger allotment. And that's why you see a lot of international employees coming to those big tech companies, right? But maybe not to some other type of employers. For universities, they also get a little bit of a bigger allotment, but internally, university policy, this is not immigration, they decide to allocate those to faculty hires.
Mm.
They decide to reserve them and save them for faculty hires. If there was, a VP level, president level type of hire that they wanted to do internationally that wasn't a faculty member, they could do it. They could do it. Or me, they could have done it. They just internally, the policies they set is they save those numbers for international faculty members. And so what could universities do? I mean, is really reassess this, right? Like, I can understand why. I can. Why a university wasn't going to spend, it's expensive to sponsor a person and it requires a lot of paperwork. I can understand why that wasn't done at my first job, right? Like, we can't bet on you. Like, we are not,
Right. Right.
I mean, I can sort of understand that compared to a faculty member that has some sort of proven research expertise and who knows. But what I can't understand is that it stays this unilateral rule. It stays this, even after someone has been there for a few years, or if a staff member also has research published and also, has a name for themselves out there and is like a vocal thought leader, why not? Why not
Right.
sponsor them, right? And so I think universities can really kind of reflect on that and understand that that's not like that's something that they're imposing on themselves, and that they're excluding a lot of potentially really great staff members. Now, I will also say, I think this comes from an even bigger problem, which has always been one of my biggest higher ed pet peeves, which is like nobody thinks of staff as
Shit.
right. Like, I'm
Don't
sure
I
this is a
know it?
theme. This is a theme of your podcast, right? Like, nobody thinks of staff as actual human beings that can add value to the organization's
Yeah, as
strategic
contributors. Yeah,
priorities.
exactly. Yeah.
And so, we're just kind of there in the background. And I remember going through a strategic planning process for one of my employers. And I remember, like, as we were doing, like, I was on the committee, it was great. I remember as we were like trying to write down what the priorities were, everything was about student well-being and faculty innovation. I'm like, yo, what about your staff members who are also publishing papers, who are also have their doctorates or not? What about the ones that are doing really cool innovative things and speaking at conferences and winning awards? Like, where's the support for them?
Mhm.
Where's the elevating their stories? Where's that? And so, like, I think it stems from that. Like, I think it's a bigger problem than just thinking about sponsoring international staff. But I think together it could make our universities so much richer.
But I remember having some of these conversations with folks.
Hmm.
It's like, hey, there's so and so. We have this person who wants to apply for a job. Well, they're German and they don't have their stuff yet. So, but this is the best candidate we have. So, what are we going to do? And I'm sitting there in my very simple, my simple
Hmm.
solutions oriented self, going, well, what do we have to do to get them? You know,
Yeah.
and the conversation just stops and it gets weird, and the conversation gets really weird,
Yeah.
and you're just sitting there going, I don't know. It just seems to me like all we have to do is just solve the doggone problem. Let's solve the problem.
Let's just do it.
Yeah, let's
Well,
just do it. Let's make
and
it happen.
that's one of the things that if you have this candidate and they're the best candidate, like, that's one of the requirements to be able to get sponsored, period. Like, if the university were willing to do it, one of the things that you have to prove to immigration is that you have interviewed extensively, like, other US citizens.
Mm,
And the US citizens cannot, like, there is no US citizen in the country who could possibly do the job that you're trying to recruit this international for, right? So it's a losing game for us out here.
yeah.
It's, and what it does, I think, is, to a person like me, is it's this, I like to call it like the immigrant mentality. And I think it's this very common, like, always striving, always trying to do 110, 120, 130%. Because just to have the opportunity to sit at the same table, right? Or to
Hmm.
even just knock on the door, you have had to prove, literally, legally, you've had to prove that you are a better performer in some
Yeah.
category, which is terrible. Like, I hate that so much. But it's the mentality that they ingrain in you. What it has done to me in my career, like, the thing that I'm healing from the most, I think, is to, like, let that go, right?
Yeah.
It's this sense of, I'm always, like, striving for the next, and I'm always trying to prove myself. And I've had performance evaluations in all of my jobs that basically tell me to slow down and calm down. And I'm like, but I
Mm,
can't.
hmm.
I
Hmm.
can't, because if I calm down, you wouldn't be able to hire me anymore. That's like the mentality. It messes with you. It
Oh,
really does.
You don't have to tell me because that's the African American
It's
experience
very
too.
similar experience.
And,
Yeah.
and except for us, it's not a legal issue; it's a philosophical
Which
issue.
is honestly even worse. I
It,
mean,
it is. It's a lot worse because I talk about this with other Black folks who work in higher ed, other African Americans specifically who
yeah.
work in higher ed as well. And so, but for your part, what is your perception of the talent experience? You have to get past all of these obstacles,
Hmm.
American policy obstacles, but then university
Hmm.
practice and policy obstacles. What does that do for your talent experience?
Hmm. Well, I think it makes you feel really just not valued, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the things that I felt, basically, it was like you're on your own figuring that part out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the part that we're going to help you with as your employer is just what we would help everyone else with, right?
Hmm.
And so, like, I think about this in the context of when you think about your paperwork, HR is doing it kind of thing, and like your actual managers and your team, like this is a whole part of your life and your hurdles that they don't see, right? So like it's isolating, and it's something that you're a little bit ashamed of and always worried about and feeling a lot of uncertainty about, like going from year to year to year not knowing if you're going to be able to stay.
Hmm.
And so for me, it just made me feel very abandoned, kind of lonely at the institution and not supported.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a very interesting segue, but
Brr, 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 brr.
l- the way forward here. I mean,
Yes.
you do have folks who are at these colleges and universities. They are trying to do their best. That whole thing about you got to prove that there's nobody else in the United States of America who can do the job is just wacky to me. Because I will say this. Let me say this before I get to your question, to this last question. That is the crappiest position to be in as a recruiter, because you're sitting there going, the best candidate is sitting here. Everyone is excited about this person who is from, Brazil. Everybody is excited about this person. So what if they're Brazilian and they don't live here yet? You know what? We are all excited about this person because we think that they're going to come in and enrich the culture of the institution, which is going to enrich the experience of the students. And again, me and my very simple mind, I'm sitting here going, we have a solution to the problem. Let's go with the solution. But because of a policy that's out of our control at that point, we have to jump through all of these hoops. So you do have these institutions that have these very interesting situations that they get in. You have these institutions that may be under resourced, but they really do want to have this very rich faculty and staff environment. What are your thoughts about things that inner colleges and universities control that they can do to make investments to alleviate the complications that international employees may encounter?
It's definitely a budget thing because it does cost money to
Hmm.
hire international employees, faculty, and staff. So I think the budgeting is something, but more than that, I'm pretty sure that's just set, right? Because there is a limit to the number of people they can sponsor. What I would suggest or ask, I guess, is for schools to really think about that rule, the we
Hmm.
won't sponsor rule. And I'm not saying you will always sponsor every international applicant that comes through your recruitment process, but give it a moment's thought, right? Give it a moment's thought. If that candidate truly is the best candidate, that, as you're saying, Eddie, has people excited, why not? Right? I,
Hmm.
I think that's investing in that kind of review and revising of those policies, I think, is important. The other thing is, I think a lot of people are just not aware that this even happens at all. I think a lot of people think that immigration is easy, that everyone has a legal path to immigration. And that's just not true. It's just not true. I lived in the US a third of my whole life. I considered myself for a long time very American, very
Hmm.
proud, and love the US. And I cannot live there. I could not stay. and I wanted to, right? And it's one of those things where I don't think people realize that. I don't think people understand that the legal way is through a sponsorship, which my employers wouldn't give me, or a marriage, which I was already married. And so neither of those things are easy, and there really is no easy path. And I just a little bit of awareness, I think, is really important for other people at the university to know.
But I mean, I think that's a great point. If your strategic plan is going to have anything about international outreach,
Hmm.
you got to know that you better have a pretty healthy budget. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
and you better have a plan to boost that budget big time, because I have heard under resource institutions say, "Hey, we want more international students," and you're going, "Okay." you know,
Good luck.
good luck. Let's see how that happens. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of falls away from the strategic plan. Well, Day, I tell you what, doggone it, you are my American. So I really appreciate you.
I mean, I'm still very connected to the US. I live
Yeah.
in Canada now, and
Yeah.
as of 2 months ago, I'm a Canadian citizen.
Oh, okay. Way to go, eh?
And way to go, A. And it's the first time I'm almost 39, and it's the first time in my life that I live where I can vote.
Oh, wow. Look at you.
Yeah.
This is well, I mean, but are you excited?
I'm very excited.
Oh,
I'm
very
very,
cool.
very excited, very proud to be Canadian, and very happy things worked out this way for me and my family.
Well, an excited day is a good day. So we really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining me. If anybody wanted to, of course, there is Talking Tactics, but if anybody did want to reach out and just get to know more about you and what you do, and of course, when people decide to listen to Talking Tactics, how can they reach out to you?
Yes, LinkedIn is best. I'm active on there. I see all my messages that I get, so just find my name on LinkedIn.
Dayana Kibilds, she is the host of Talking Tactics, also strategy director for Ologie. Thank you so much for joining me on I Want to Work There.
Thanks, Eddie.
I Want to Work There is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Day Kibilds, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.